Yeah, I think we'll kick things off. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Eunomia's latest Fit for the Future webinar on PPWR. Just a few words on webinar etiquette whilst people are piling through the lobby. So microphones will be turned off for the duration of this webinar. The chat box will also be disabled. You can use your camera if you wish, but please note the webinar will be recorded and published online. You'll notice that we have a question, a Q&A function in the webinar. So feel free to submit any questions throughout the webinar session, and we'll have time to hopefully answer the majority of these questions towards the end of the session. So, as I say, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alex Forrest from Eunomia. This session builds on our previous PPWR webinar sessions. For those of you that haven't attended our previous PPWR webinars, we'll signpost you to that content in the slides that follow. Why are we running this session today? There's been a lot of recent developments that warrant an update on a few topics in respect of PPWR, not least short-term compliance requirements for August 2026. Alongside those short-term requirements, there's been various announcements by the Commission, various guidance that's been published by JRC around topics such as labelling and transport packaging, which we'll get into as part of this session. Next slide, please. Just to introduce, for those of you that don't know Eunomia, we're an environmental consultancy that have been around for 25 years. We're celebrating our 25-year anniversary this year. We've been heavily involved in PPWR development, supporting the European Commission to design what is now PPWR, and we continue to work with the Commission on future PPR developments. Alongside this, we work with brands, producers and value chain partners on PPWR strategy and compliance. Just to introduce the speakers from today, in addition to myself, we have two of our experts, Chiarina and Amie, two senior consultants that are heavily involved in our policy work for PPWR, working with brands and value chain partners on strategy and compliance. I'm delighted to welcome Darren West, Global Lead for Circular Economy Solutions from SAP here today. Darren will be providing some insights around how SAP is supporting customers on PPWR compliance. Next slide, please. So just as a very quick overview of the services that we deliver in this space, as I say, our work is heavily focused on PPWR as part of this session, but we work globally on packaging EPR compliance and strategy right across the value chain. Now, there'll be details at the bottom of this session on how to connect with us for any inquiries. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda today. So first of all, we'll be hearing from Chiarina, who will provide some updates around sort of key compliance requirements. So this is a key part of today's session. You'll hear from Amie on what companies need to do now to comply with a focus on these August 2026 requirements. And you'll hear from Darren around how SAP is supporting PPWR through SAP customers. And then finally, we'll have time to respond to any questions that come through the chat function. So without further ado, over to Chiarina.
Hello, everybody. Let's get into it. I am going to do a very brief introduction to the PPWR, but I know that if you're here, you have heard about it, know what it is. I'm not going to do a very in-depth, description of everything. We already did a webinar, and the link should be live in the presentation in the lower left-hand corner. If you do want a bit of a 101 on the PPWR, as you will know, it is the main law dealing with sustainable packaging design and packaging waste management in the EU. The issue it's ultimately addressing is that packaging accounts for a very significant amount of material use. In the EU, about a third of municipal waste is packaging, 40% of plastic is used for packaging, and 50% of paper. So it is really intensive in terms of its material use. And then there's issues of marine litter and microplastics. So the law addresses this by promoting greater material circularity, by reducing packaging waste generation through waste reduction targets, through increasing recycling, by improving packaging design and increasing recycled content to provide a market for the materials. The waste reduction and the recycled content and recyclability targets are all ambitious, and they're going to have huge impacts. And in the next slide, we're going to just break down a little bit and think about how these are affecting producers specifically. I want to flag the stuff that's coming up really soon. The PPWR entered into force in February 2025 and has a general date of application in August 2026. But then a whole series of requirements start being necessary as time goes on. So the first ones that are applying are about minimizing substances of concern. Limit values are going to apply. All packaging must be recyclable. Green claims must exceed the regulatory requirements. Reuse systems must be in place, and reusable packaging must meet definitions. Those are the first things that have to be satisfied. Some of these need to be documented, and we'll go into that process later. And some of these are grandfathered from the Packaging Waste Directive, like the requirement for packaging to be recyclable, the minimization of substances of concern, and general minimization of packaging weight and volume. So some of these are not new, except now in the PPWR, they're going to have to be evidenced in technical documentation and declarations of conformity. And so each year after this first important milestone of August 2026, new requirements come into play almost every year. 2030 is a really big year when the first recyclability targets apply, and the recycled content targets apply, and the void space requirements on particular formats of packaging, and packaging that does not satisfy the recyclability requirements will be restricted from the market. So that's a big deal. Then in 2035, we've got more stringent targets in terms of recyclability, and by 2040, the most stringent targets will come into play on recycled content, on the recyclability, on reuse, and so a lot is going to happen in the next 15 years. How is this going to affect businesses placing packaging on the market? I like to think of this in three groups. On one hand, you have all of the sustainability requirements, and the manufacturer, as defined in the PPWR, is responsible for those. You have this variety of 8 different requirements, and for each packaging item, the manufacturer has to complete technical documentation and do a declaration of conformity to show that these requirements have been satisfied. And then you have EPR, by which the costs of end-of-life waste management are met, principally for separate collection. It's optional for it to also cover residual waste. So mostly it's about recycling, collection, transport, and treatment. And there's a few extra things in scope now of EPR, but not a huge number. But one of the new things is that EPR fees will have to be modulated according to recyclability. And there's some optional things like EPR fees may be modulated according to recycled content. So in order to comply with EPR requirements, that is for producers as defined under the PPWR, and they have to report the packaging they place on the market according to 22 material categories, and then they pay a fee per ton of packaging. And that's how EPR is complied with. Then there's a whole bunch of other requirements. Some are for users of packaging, some are from member states, but they will impact producers in a big way. And like DRS and the reuse targets. So we will talk about them a bit. But yeah, those are the 3 main groups of things and how they will affect producers of packaging. And so updates, new developments. A lot has happened this year. The main topic of this talk is really, of my next slides, is going to be the guidance that was released. And then also there's a frequently asked question document. The guidance released by the Commission provides indications where there was room for legal interpretation. And then the FAQ is just questions that they've received. And I just did a little analysis to show that in both of these, reuse is a really big topic, substances of concern is a really big topic, and also the sustainability requirements in general. And then things like DRS, EPR, recycling targets have received slightly less attention. So I would say that most of the attention is indeed on how producers can comply. The JRC has released a technical proposal for labelling for waste sorting and recycling bins, and the European Commission will take that into account when they're doing their delegated act on labelling that's going to come out. And in terms of design for recycling, the European Centre on Standardisation is working on design for recycling of the working group 3 is for all other materials, working group 10 is for plastics particularly, and some drafts of standards for different polymers have been published in April 2026. The JRC are also due to release a technical proposal on design for recycling. That's coming at the end of 2026 or the beginning of 2027. They reserve the right to make, they'll take into account the European Centre for Standardisation's work, but they reserve the right to make amends in case it's not ambitious enough or if in case there are inconsistencies. And then the European Commission will take into account the JRC's recommendation when they do their delegated act on design for recycling in 2028. And then we have a couple of other things. All of these links are live. You can click through those, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going and talk about updates according that are in the guidance mainly. So for recyclability, we've had the clarification in terms of the timeline that yes, all packaging must be recyclable from August 2026, and it needs to be documented once the delegated act on design for recycling assessment is in force. So yes, that requirement does apply really soon, but it doesn't need to be evidenced until 2028. Then we have the incineration landfill ban for recyclables. It's going to take effect in 2030. That wasn't really clear. And items exempted from the DFR criteria based on material application like cork and textiles, etc., will not, however, be included. But the ban still applies to commingled waste. Recycled content. So exemptions, they apply directly. The Commission does not need to approve them, but they must be documented in the technical documentation. And that's important to know for a manufacturer. And in terms of substances of concern, limits apply to the packaging unit as a whole, and that includes inks, varnishes, and adhesives, and that's something that has been asked. Anything that was placed on the market prior to August 2026, when the requirement applies, still in circulation, and this is foods, contact packaging for PFAs, anything that was placed on the market before August 2026 can remain in circulation. But if it was manufactured prior to August 2026, then it's not compliant, it can't be placed on the market after August 2026. There's no sell-through periods. Whereas for something like labeling, there are some periods of grace, let's say. Next topics. This is a bit of a fly through, but it gives you a flavor. Packaging minimization. Existing requirements pursuant to the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive remain in place until 2030. They're sort of grandfathered, after which the Article 10 weight volume minimization requirement applies. The existing standard can be used as guidance, but a new one is expected in 2027. But the Article 10 requirement, it doesn't need to be evidenced until 2030. So there's a period where, yes, there is a requirement, but again, it doesn't need to be evidenced yet in the technical documentation. And then there was a clarification for who's responsible for the empty space requirements. For the 50% maximum empty space ratio for grouped transport and e-commerce packaging, this packaging and user or filler who has to do that. But for sales packaging, it's the manufacturer who does the conformity assessment procedure and does the declaration of conformity who has to do that. Compostability, it's been made clear that member states have until August 2026 to make items mandatorily compostable so that they can remain allowed under the PPWR, which has a really restricted list of what's allowed to be compostable. And in terms of restrictions, items of formats, materials and uses listed in Annex 5 are banned from 2030. This includes composites that are more than 5% plastic, and that is a major clarification. But other items that are within the single-use plastic directive scope and definition, so anything that has less than 5% plastic content, or other uses like takeaway, can be banned or be subject to charges under the single-use plastic directive. So they sort of dovetail these requirements. I'm going to keep going. There's a lot of updates on reuse, and I just chose some that were a bit more focused on what producers have to do. So there have been lots of clarifications on who the manufacturer is, and that's important because it's the manufacturer that who's responsible for complying with the Article 5 to 12 sustainability requirements and has to do the technical documentation and the declaration of conformity. And so in many cases, and we'll see this again in the responsibilities updates, the branding criteria is really more important than most of the others, and so that is helpful. Exemptions from reuse targets. This is important because this is a new thing it's clear that it has to be evidenced in technical documentation. So it's the criteria for exemption of custom designed transport packaging for large machinery or commodities from reuse targets. So that has to be evidenced. Labeling, it was just sort of confirmed reusable transport packaging, apart from e-commerce packaging, is exempt from waste sorting labeling like other transport packaging. The reason being is that those commercial operators should really know what to do with that packaging, and it's also not it's generally being reused, and it only is end of life right at the end of a long lifespan, we hope. Reusable packaging placed on the market in this interim period between February 2025, February 2029, sort of has 3 years grace with regard to reusability labeling, but it must comply from February 2032. And it's thought that this should be refurbished, and there's not going to be that much packaging that will have to be refurbished with labels, but that's what's expected to happen. And reusable packaging in open loop systems, so with no system operator, is exempt from reusability labeling. So that should make some producers' lives easier, manufacturers' lives easier. And also, any reusable packaging that was placed on the market prior to the PPWR entering into force does not need to be brought into conformity with any of the sustainability requirements, including labeling. It can remain in circulation. So that's everything placed on the market before February 2025. So that's very useful, I think, for everybody. And almost there, responsibilities. So, who is responsible for the Article 5 to 12 sustainability requirements? It's the manufacturer. And the guidance really makes clear that the branding criteria in most situations is the priority. So the manufacturer, there should be just one in the supply chain per type of item. It depends really on who designed the packaging, and this is assumed to be the brand for branded products. And the new bit really is that the same applies to reusable, service, grouped, primary production and transport packaging, which it wasn't quite as clear before. And the packaging type criterion to determine whether the manufacturer of the packaging, the packaged product is going to rarely need to be used. The exemption for micro enterprises, which is less than 2 FTEs or less than 10 million euro turnover a year, happens when the packaging supplier is in the member state, and that's new. There was an inconsistency in the regulation. Previously, it said when the packaging supplier was in the EU, but it's actually aligned now with the definition of producer. So if the packaging supplier is in the member state, a micro enterprise is exempt, and the packaging supplier is the manufacturer. And I think, however, it means that fewer micro enterprises may be exempted because it's sort of a harder condition to meet for the exemption. EPR, so who's the responsible producer? There can be several different responsible producers for one item type within the supply chain, depending on where a specific individual unit goes in the union. And that's what's very important clarification. It sort of aligns things a bit better with the status quo, I think. And so, EPR fees are due in the member state in which the packaging is expected to become waste. That's as per the Waste Framework Directive. If an item is exported outside the EU, no EPR fees are due. And the EPR fees should really be reimbursed if they're exported to another member state. Producers, need to report to the national EPR registers according to the new harmonized rules for the first time by June 2029. That's been clarified. Also, labeling for EPR scheme membership physical labeling is no longer allowed, and it has to be in a digital carrier, sort of to avoid multiplicity, proliferation of labels. Okay, so that was a very rapid tour of some updates. And I wanted to leave you with these big 5 takeaways. There are 5 questions businesses must answer about their packaging as soon as possible. 1, am I considered the manufacturer and so responsible for compliance with the sustainability requirements? Or am I considered the producer and responsible for EPR compliance? And then there's these 3 things that are coming in August 2026. Can I evidence compliance regarding substances of concern, green claims, and reuse systems being in place, and reusable packaging meeting definitions? And my colleague Amie is going to go into how companies in practical terms do this.
Thanks, Chiarina. Next slide, please.
Ooh.
Perfect, thank you. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what companies should think about doing now in order to comply with the August 2026 requirements. So before placing packaging on the market, manufacturers will need to carry out the conformity assessment procedure referred to in Article 38, which means they should roll up 2 things. So firstly, the technical documentation, and secondly, the declaration of conformity. And the conformity assessment procedure is essentially the process of demonstrating that the sustainability, safety, labelling and information requirements of the PPWR have been fulfilled. And to comply with your August requirements, companies should start by identifying which articles from the PPWR are relevant to their operations. And this is because not all articles are applicable to all companies, and your role in the supply chain and your requirements are likely to be different depending on your specific operations. And while the PPWR does provide some information as to what should be included in the technical documentation and the declaration, which I'll come on to a bit later, it does not provide a particularly detailed template or a set of structured questions to help companies to identify which articles are relevant. So as a starting point, we suggest that you ask yourself some of these questions, and I'll go through some of them now to help you to identify the articles that are relevant to your business. So firstly, what is your role in the supply chain? So are you a supplier or a manufacturer or something else? As this will impact if you need to conduct the technical documentation and the declaration, or someone else. What type of packaging do you put on the market? Is it sales, grouped or transport? And this impacts which articles are relevant to you. Is the packaging single use or reusable? So some articles are only specific to reusable packaging. Is the packaging food contact, as this can impact the requirements for the substances of concern and PFAS under Article 5? Are you manufacturing your own products? So similar to the first point, this will impact if you need to conduct the conformity assessment or maybe provide data to someone else. There are also a few more requirements related specifically to reusable packaging, and then finally green claims. So the requirement starts in August this year, so it's important to bear this in mind if you do have any green claims on your packaging. So after you've identified the articles that are relevant to you for August, you'll be in a much better position to start completing your documentation, which we can now move on to now. The next slide, please. Thank you. So the requirements for what manufacturers should include in their technical documentation are listed under Annex 7. And this includes information like a description of the packaging, any drawings, a list of standards that have been used to assess the packaging and how that fulfills the PPWR obligations, and information about test methods that have been used to assess the packaging, and a description of the tests. So essentially, the technical documentation that you prepare should make it possible to assess how the packaging performs with the articles that are relevant to you for August this year. And then if we move on to the next slide, please. In terms of the declaration, this also needs to be completed by the manufacturer. So the requirements for what to include in the DOC are included in Annex 8. So this is information like a unique identifier, the manufacturer details, a description of the packaging, and again, those standards that you have used to conduct your assessment. So the PPWR states that the manufacturer shall draw up the DOC for each packaging type and keep it together with the technical documentation. And the Market Surveillance Authority in the member state may ask you to provide this. They might do this for 5 years for single-use packaging and 10 years after for reusable packaging. And just as a final point, it's important just to note that as the other articles in the PPWR enter into force, you may need to update your DOC and your technical documentation, which means it's important that you review the PPWR in full now so that you know which requirements will come into force in each year and how they'll impact your operations. And I will now hand over to Darren, who will continue the conversation around the DOC.
Exactly. Hello, thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm from a small German startup called SAP. And I wanted to tell you a little bit more about how our customers are going to get ahead of the regulations and what we can do to help. So if we go on to the next slide, a little bit of a disclaimer because you're going to see some really cool new stuff that we're just about to launch. So it comes with a disclaimer. Anyway, my name is Darren. I am the Global Head of Circular Economy Solutions. Many of you know SAP, but if you haven't heard, about 70% of the consumer goods industry uses our systems to either manufacture or run their finances. So we have a very good customer base within consumer branded products, but also when we're talking about packaging, we get a lot of customers in other sectors as well, like pharmaceuticals, even some steel companies, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. So we've had a solution in the market now for some time. It's called SAP Responsible Design and Production, and we've been working with Eunomia because these guys are the experts. And so we've been working with them to really understand this PPWR. And we wrote a paper together last year, which is published on our website, freely available if you'd like to download it. Gives you a much kind of broader overview of like, these are all the things you need to do. And we're continuously working with Eunomia to update our knowledge and feed that into our products. So one of the first takeaways I want to give you is that, as Amie just mentioned, PPWR is not a point event. It's a series of events over time, increasing in complexity. And just to re-emphasize the point about the document of compliance, what that means is if you change your packaging, often packaging changes every year or every 18 months or so, or if any of these new rules come in, which they will over time, you've got to run that document of conformity again. So let's have a look at the next slide. How does this impact customers? And it really depends who you are talking about within the customer space. So for example, multiple personas are impacted. And what we say at SAP is because of this complexity, because of the granularity of information that you've just seen from Chiarina and from Amie, this means that your packaging strategy has to become a data strategy as well. So if you're in finance, it means what products are at risk if I can't prove my conformity with PPWR, that puts that product at risk. What products are at risk and what revenue impact is that? If I'm in procurement, for example, it means I need the supplier data. That supplier data from my packaging suppliers is absolutely critical to that conformity statement. If I'm in operations or in R&D or packaging design, my decisions are going to impact every single country I sell into now. And for sustainability teams, it means compliance must be auditable. So as Amie said, you've got to keep these records for audit purposes for 5 or 10 years, depending on the type of packaging. And then finally, if I'm an operations or IT team, I've got to figure out how to get all this data from suppliers into my systems and available and stored in the right format. So in short, PPWR compliance becomes a cross-functional data problem. And it's complex, but it's not necessarily hard. So let's explain how we can help you with this and what we've done to help our customers. So if we go on to the next slide, please. All right, just to set the scene, this product I mentioned called Responsible Design and Production, this is what we built to handle packaging compliance. So you need to understand this in order for me to explain the next bit about the documents of conformity. So what we built is a system that essentially at its heart has a model of packaging. Primary, secondary, tertiary, so all that transportation packaging, as well as the primary packaging. And it does essentially 3 things. It basically takes what products am I selling where, what packaging goes with those products, primary, secondary, tertiary, and then it says, okay, fine, let's mash that together so that we know exactly what materials and in what combinations, and that's very important for recyclability, for example, am I putting into my packaging. We call that the packaging composition. And then it's very important for EPR, plastic taxes, and now PPWR to understand, okay, what are the different rules that I need to comply with in different countries? And what we do there is rules can be coded into software. So we can try and make this as simple as we can. But let's show you what the document of conformity will look like. So let's jump on to the next slide. Okay, so what we've done is we've said, okay, this needs to be very simple to use. So we basically built document of conformity templates. This is coming out in June. This is why I put the disclaimer on, because it may slightly change in how we present it. But basically, these are the mock-ups from our product team, so you can see what's going to come out. And it follows exactly what Chiarina and Amie were saying. These are the key bits of information that you need to show. And it will be available, obviously, in different languages because, obviously, the member states need to see it in different languages. And what we're going to do is produce a template that then customers can add to. So the templates are designed based exactly on the PPWR annexes, but customers may want to add or include different things depending on their business or their product type. So we've given the ability for customers to edit these fields as well. Let's look on to the next slide. Okay, so here's some of the things that you might be thinking. Okay, how do I cope with things like missing declarations? What we will do is create a system of checks in our software so that you can see, okay, I'm missing certain information. That means that I am not able to produce this declaration of conformity. This sends a flag to the user, what is the data missing, so that they can go and get it and be ready in time. We will produce the conformity assessment, as you saw from Amie there, and it will automatically generate that from all the information held in core systems around packaging. So like I said, it doesn't have to be hard to do this if you have the right data and the right systems in place. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so one of the things we're then going to do, having built these 4 templates that are customizable, is let's apply some clever technology techniques, such as our business AI agent, we call it Joule. And that allows us to make the whole experience so much simpler, particularly for non-expert users. And not all of you out there will be experts in the fine detail of PPWR. So what we're doing is we're using an AI agent, which can then have a natural language conversation with you. So you can ask questions, and the agent can go and generate the reports for you and also answer questions and queries that you might have. It would then propose missing values automatically and continuously validate, map, and persist the data, and again, look for errors. So let's keep going. in the interest of time, because we want to give you some questions. Other thoughts we have around dashboards. So let's look at how ready are you? So a packaging engineer or a sustainability manager or even a CFO can examine where are we in terms of readiness, where are the risks, where are the hotspots, that kind of thing. And then track key KPIs, like you can track performance over time so you can see you're improving. Let's jump on to the next one. What we're thinking again about PPWR and this documents of compliance, as I said, it's not a point event. So things are going to change over time, and you're going to need to keep those documents, including the historic ones, because you're going to change packaging over time, and you're going to need to archive that. So a whole lot of thinking has gone into how do we ensure that we have version control, and that users can find the relevant ones if they are requested for audit. Now let's move on to the next one. Right, I did mention we even had some steel customers. Here is an example of what happens if you get it right. So what I want to end with is a very positive note, because I'm thinking PPWR, you've heard all that complexity, you've listened to Chiarina and Amie and gone, oh my word, this is hard, or this is complex. It doesn't have to be. By digitizing what you do and by using software like SAP provide, you can simplify your reporting, you can identify risk, you can actually save money through EPR and eco-modulation and fees. You can save money by being more efficient. And here is an example, and we've got many examples of this. So it's not all stressful and doom and gloom. It is possible to take PPWR and turn it to your advantage. So that's a kind of uplifting message. Now, I just wanted to finish on one other slide, which was, why do we, SAP, work with Eunomia? And I think it's also a message for why you should work with Eunomia. So basically what we see is that customers need practical guidance. They don't just need summaries of regulation. What they need is clear guidance. And a lot of customers, when we talk to them, they're struggling with gaps in data. They're struggling to find recyclability evidence. They're struggling to find or calculate their EPR fees. And this presents a risk. So working with Eunomia helps us help our SAP customers to really understand all this stuff. And we build that into our software so that customers can automate that. The second area is policy and technology. So policy and technology together can deliver real business outcome. So what we have found is that working with Eunomia brings us this deep technical regulatory knowledge, whereas we know all about IT and systems and driving data. And you put those two together, you get a very powerful combination, which means that companies can really quickly understand what do they need to do, what do they need to change, and also can kind of benefit, as I mentioned, from eco-modulation. And that's my third point, really, which is that this combination of knowledge and technology can help you to get ahead of the regulation. So you can run a more efficient ship, you can reduce your EPR fees, you can ensure that you can put products on the market and be sure that you can say, I am compliant, and also you can face down any green claims. So that's why we work with Eunomia, and we're delighted to recommend working with Eunomia to all of you out there. So thank you for having me on your webinar.
Great, thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to just wrap things up here and just try and reserve a couple of minutes or so for questions. We are responding to questions in the chat as we go through. Next slide, please. So just to sort of finish off, as I say, if you are looking to try to navigate PPWR compliance, there is an opportunity to reach out on. In fact, the next slide, I think, includes a quick link to how you can contact us. But yeah, if you're experiencing challenges around compliance and you have questions, then do feel free to reach out.